Welcome back to the Save It for the Blind podcast. I am Carlson, the Hunt Program Coordinator for CWA, and we have a heck of an episode today with talking about politics and our political effort at CWA. So my guests today on my right, we have CWA President John Carlson. Across from me, we have Mark Hennelly, the Vice President of Advocacy. And on his right or left, we have Mark Smith. Mark, you want to introduce yourself and your position and how you're affiliated with CWA?
Yeah, my name is Mark Smith. I'm the owner of Smith Policy Group. We're a contract lobbying firm, and I basically am part of the CWA team helping with lobbying efforts at the state and the federal level under contract to the organization, and so sort of provide that extra oomph that the policy and legislative effort needs these days.
Okay, how long have you been doing this for CWA?
Oh, man. I think we've been working together for 4 or 5 years now, something like that. So I started my firm around 2018. Prior to that, I had already been working for Grassland Water District, right? And before that, I was actually the in-house government relations person for Ducks Unlimited, right? So I kind of cut my teeth with them and have had the opportunity to work with the 3 largest organizations in the state working on waterfowl issues. And frankly, it's been a blast. I love it.
Okay, great. No, that's awesome. So you and Mark work hand in hand for CWA's political efforts, correct?
Yes. And then I should mention, too, we have a federal contract lobbyist in D.C. as well, Natural Resource Results, and we use them as well, too. So they are a part of our team.
Okay. Very nice.
We're everywhere.
Yeah, hey, the more the merrier.
He's down at the Capitol every day. He's got his office down there, and he really checks up on things and makes sure that nothing falls through the cracks. So we appreciate it.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. No, that is great. Well, we'll start with a hot button topic that has recently popped up in AB 28. And I know California hunters, California gun owners, even just ammo purchasers should be very aware if they aren't aware of AB 28. If, Mark, you want to go into what it is, when it's coming into effect, if it's already in effect, and kind of the background behind it.
Sure. Yeah, it's an 11% excise tax on all firearms and ammunition sold in California. This is actually a bill that has been out there for many years that we have been fighting. And it's not just California waterfowl, a whole host of other hunting and gun groups were opposing this legislation. Unfortunately, this year, it finally barely passed the state Senate by 1 vote, cleared the assembly, and then went to the governor, and he signed it into law. We were very disappointed with that. We believe ultimately it's going to be a disincentive for a lot of people to hunt, particularly new hunters that may not have a lot of resources, financial resources at their disposal. And we think the implication that hunters are somehow responsible for gun violence, the way the measure was written, is really insulting to our community. So, yeah, this one is definitely hard to swallow. So that's the bad news, but there is some good news. There's definitely going to be some lawsuits. The bill actually does not take effect until July 1st of 2024.
Okay.
So there is some lag time there.
So run out and buy your shotguns now.
Yeah, get what you can.
Cases of shells.
Pile it up. And so a lawsuit by CRPA, I think, is very likely. They're one of our partners on this bill opposing it. And I've heard of even some other lawsuits. So that's in the works. And then there is going to be an initiative on the November 2024 ballot that's an anti-tax measure. And this anti-tax measure is retroactive to AB 28. If it passes, it would require, and I think it only needs a majority vote to pass, it will require that AB 28 go back to not only the Assembly but the Senate, pass by a 2/3 vote there. And then if it's still able to do that, it will go on a statewide vote to the voters and have to pass by a majority. So there's a very good possibility that this thing, within 6 months of time of being enacted, could then be kind of put on the shelf. We'll see how that goes. I think California waterfowl, we're free to support initiatives one way or the other. If this looks like it has legs, we'll probably help out with that campaign and try to, press the voters to approve it.
So even though, there's bad news going around, there's still light at the end of the tunnel that we could come out, the same way we started.
It's one of these things like it's never over until it's over.
Okay.
And so, fortunately, we get another bite at the apple.
What Mark's referring to is something called the Taxpayer Protection Act. It's sponsored by the business community, and it's mostly dealing with, local taxes, some state taxes as well on business. But it has this unique benefit in that it is retroactive, and as such, it would apply to what just happened in the legislature. And to give some context to AB 28, right, like it is frustrating for us because we fought this thing off for about 10 years.
Wow.
The proposal has been around for quite a while. And even as recently as a couple years ago, we had strong coalitions of both sort of moderate Democrats and progressive left Democrats who weren't supporting the policy. And I'll give you a great example why. Like during COVID, we saw lines outside of gun stores from communities of color and people who had never purchased firearms before because they wanted to purchase firearms for home protection and self-defense, right?
Correct.
Because it was COVID, it was uncertain times, right? I think people recognized that, these barriers, these disincentives to purchasing firearms in their communities were not the right thing to pass, right? And this year, the Brady gun violence, the Brady campaign, and Moms for Gun Violence Prevention, whatever the organizations are called, they did a good job of arm wrestling legislators into submission to finally get this thing over the finish line. We actually had some doubts whether the governor would sign it. I mean, ultimately, he did end up signing it, but the governor has staked out a position for himself that he doesn't really want to go out and raise a bunch of taxes and fees, right? It's not a very popular position a lot of the times. And here's a guy who's thinking about running for president in a couple of years, right? I mean, he makes no bones about that. And so when you pass something like this in the state of California, that becomes your historical record, right? That's the kind of thing that gets brought up on the campaign trail when you're thinking about running at a nationwide level. And there are plenty of people out there who would disagree with this policy in California.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious to see how that ends up shaking out.
That's a very interesting point because I think the average person doesn't take that into account. They see it as 11%, and that's where it ends in their thought process. And coming from your background, that thought process is like this could have ramifications for him down the line.
Sure.
And it's a big deal. It's not just here's 11%, I'll sign it. The people that are the gun owners are gonna fault for it, but there's a lot more to that.
Sure. I mean, it's having immediate ramifications for one of the people that cast the deciding vote that let this thing out of the Senate, putting it on the governor's desk. And, frankly, we were surprised that Senator Melissa Hurtado from the San Joaquin Valley voted in support of this bill. She'd been a staunch opponent of it previously. I text messages in my phone indicating that she wasn't going to vote for the bill, and then it gets called up on the floor, and lo and behold, she casts a yes vote. She's running for Congress right now. Against Representative David Valadao, and she's got a Democratic primary she's got to get through. And frankly, I hear that this is becoming an issue in her campaign, right? She represents she's trying to get elected to a Democratic-leaning seat in the San Joaquin Valley, but Democrats in the Valley, they enjoy their hunting, they enjoy their recreational sports shooting. And so we're going to see whether or not a vote like this has an impact in a candidate's race almost immediately.
Yeah, that's very interesting. John, do you see this? Say, worst case scenario, it ends up sticking around. How is this going to have ramifications for, hunters and the R3, the new hunters that are coming back, the old ones that are being reactivated? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with Mark and both Marks. This is going to be very, very damaging to people trying to get into the sport, new folks. I mean, there's so much competition out there right now for people for their recreational time. There's competition across the board. Teenagers, now they're practicing their sports year round, basically. So to get them into an activity like hunting, it's challenging for the families. And then, every dollar counts. So you've got this raise in 11% on top of it already being expensive. No one's saying it's not expensive to be a hunter in this state.
Yes, it is.
Right. So I just, it's terrible. And to put this on the backs of law-abiding citizens, it's a travesty.
It's not just hunters, right? You got to think about the school programs, the trap shooting programs,
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
competition
Right.
programs.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
kids go on to get college scholarships out of programs like
Good
that.
point.
Right?
My
And-
son has been shooting in the California youth shooting sports Association since he was in 7th grade. And I'm a coach on the team here in town. And you're right. You're absolutely right. The families that, that season goes from like January until July. So the folks that are really serious, they're practicing twice a week. The kids are usually shooting 200 rounds a week.
That's going to add up on 11%.
Big time. And then you've got fees for all the tournaments. But the kids that are at the top, they do get college scholarship offers. We have like 3 folks from our team, 3 young men and women that are in college now because of that. So it's an impact across the board, no doubt about it.
Gotcha. Well, let's switch over to something a little more bright. So the Nesting Bird Habitat Incentive Program. Mark, do you want to talk about what that is and how it began and where we're at with that?
Yeah, so everybody that's a duck hunter and a pheasant hunter in California knows that, we've had this long-term decline in local mallard populations as well as pheasant populations. And so, years ago, CWA looked at this, and obviously there's many components to that, but one certainly is the lack of nesting cover in certain areas, particularly in agricultural areas that have irrigated agriculture, your rice fields. They just don't have that cover out on the rice checks, or you don't have the same fallowing that you did, say, in the late 90s, mid 90s. And so, the whole point is, what can we do then to bring these birds back and support their breeding effort? So we came to the legislature and asked Assemblymember Gallagher, who now is the minority leader, to run a bill to create an incentive program to put more nesting cover out on the landscape. The great thing about the program, it's very flexible for farmers and other landowners. We didn't want a one-size-fits-all. For instance, it allows people to rotate their fallowed fields around their property year to year, and just make sure that the landowners, have as much flexibility to implement it, because without their support, we can't get this done, right? But believe it or not, the program also, the dollars can be used on public lands as well.
Oh, wow.
So, hopefully some of our state wildlife areas and refuges will see some habitat improvements.
How is that program getting funded?
Yeah, so the way that is done, originally it was supposed to be funded by a bond measure that was on the statewide ballot, and unfortunately that barely failed. And so we went back and said, okay, what are we going to do now? If we can't get just general public funding, how are we going to get this thing funded? And so it was agreed that let's just incrementally increase the upland and the duck stamp fee on the state side. The federal duck stamp had been increased a few years back by $10, and there really wasn't much of an outcry on it. And if you look at all the different costs of waterfowl hunting, $10 for each stamp is a drop in the bucket compared now to the price of shells, equipment, guns, everything else. That's not going to make or break anybody. And of course, it's a one-time payment every year too. It's not like you have to go every couple weeks and keep purchasing these things. But there was still some pushback on it from some hunters, but the vast majority recognized the benefit, certainly recognized the need to bolster our local mallard and pheasant numbers. And so Assemblymember Aguiar Curry then ran a bill, and fortunately that made its way through the process and was signed by the governor. So now year in and year out, we have these extra stamp fees that will go to this nesting bird program. And this year was the first year of the program being implemented, and I think it included like 34 different landowners and over 2,000 acres of nesting habitat. And when I say nesting habitat, it's focused in areas where they think the greatest production, possibility is. So it's going to be near brood water and other areas that historically produced a lot of birds. So we want just the best of the best properties. And the reports back that we got was that, it did do some good. I mean, there were quite a few birds that were raised off of it. So hopefully we can expand the number of acres and landowners for next year. A big focus will be getting back to the public lands, also implementing it on some of these state wildlife areas and refuges, which, they should do their part in improving the mallard production. But then it also, if it's in the hunt area, will create great new pheasant habitat.
Yeah, definitely.
And improve opportunities for upland game bird hunters.
So this is a one-time increase, or is this going to increase over time?
It is going to be adjusted for inflation, just
Okay.
like all of our
Just like
other
all the other
stamps
stamps,
and
yep.
licenses, but that
Correct.
will just go up very little every
Okay.
year. So yeah, but the base fee is $10.
All right.
And
Well, it's good to see it's already in use and making
yeah,
effect.
Exactly. Yep.
I kind of see this as the culmination of a years-long effort that CWA has been working on to get habitat back out on the ground, right? I remember us working on fallowed lands programs where, if you go up and down the valley, when they fallow these fields, they just laser level them flat. Yeah. There's nothing out there but brown dirt blowing in the dust, right? And we have always argued that if you're going to do that, if you're going to transfer water off fallow your field, at least let the volunteer sort of growth occur, because it provides some level of cover, some level of habitat. Right?
Anything's better than nothing.
Anything's better than nothing, right? And we've been working on that for years, going back to working with Lois Wolk when she was in the assembly, if you remember, right? And now we actually have a robust funded program that generates this habitat cover out there for ducks and, frankly, other species as well, right? Which is, I think, part of the value here. And it's just great to see that hunters are willing to step up and put their money where their mouth is. It's not always the right thing for them to do to fund everything, but in the case of a program like this, I think it is the right thing. And, I think one of the things Mark touched on are the partners who we worked with on this legislation. Gallagher on the Republican side, Aguiar Curry on the Democratic side. I mean, James is now the #1 Republican in charge of all the Republicans in the Assembly, and Cecilia's #2. And so we've done a really great job of cultivating relationships with members who care about our issues and have then positioned themselves to be leaders within their legislative caucuses and help carry our priorities forward. Because that's part of the struggle here, right? You get some backbencher to carry something, they're maybe not going to be as successful.
Picking the right people to take your stuff forward.
Right.
Well, and along those lines, a lot of people ask me, with all of our lobby and all of our advocacy, how does CWA get into the doors of legislators that might be anti-hunting or anti-gun? And what I've told people for years, CWA, we have kids camps. We have 17,000 to 20,000 acres a year that we restore on the ground of wetlands. And like Mark said, that's not just for waterfowl.
Yeah.
That helps wetland-dependent mammals, shorebirds, all kinds of things. And so when they hear that we're multifaceted, we're walking the talk on habitat, we're walking the talk on getting kids out into the outdoors, it gets us into those doors. And then these guys, they're our closers. They bring us in, and we have great relationships on both sides of the aisle. And that's the only way you're going to get anything done.
And up and down the state, from San Diego all the way up to the very tip top of California. And part of what we do that's great about building these relationships is we take people out in the blind. We take people out on field tours, right? James, if you're listening to this, take you out in the blind this fall, but you got to prove you're shooting, man. Can't be embarrassing us like that when you're out there.
I can't believe you went there. I can't
I know he's
we're
busy.
supposed to leave it in the blind. Hold on a minute here. Come on.
He's got so much going on. We got to take him out more, actually, so he can be better. But we'll take Aguiar Curry out, for example. We took her out on a field tour, and she got to see the habitat that we were talking about promoting through the bill before she actually ran it. And then we went out and we looked for nests in the grass, right? And so to have that physical hands-on experience, to show them the value that we are trying to create through the legislation we're asking them to carry is invaluable. And CWA does a great job of organizing that stuff and taking those members out to show them that.
Talking in stuffy offices about things that they can't see with their own eyes, that doesn't do us a whole lot of good. But getting them out there on the landscape where they can touch, feel, smell the whole thing, that's going to make an impact. And try to
definitely.
do as much of that as we can every
And
year.
when we do our lobby days, and so I'm only at the Capitol a few days a year, right? These guys are there day in, day out. But you have staffers and legislators looking you in the eye and saying, I had a blast at that trap shooting event last year, or I had a blast getting out on the wetlands tours. All those things, they remember, and they're going to remember them for a long time. And it's going to help them make the decisions that are beneficial.
Well, one of the decisions that hopefully is going to be beneficial for us in the near future is our pintail. So This is a hot topic. California hunters want their pintail. That's what we see. We're at one. Let's just start from the beginning. Why are we at one? How has it come to that point? And where are we moving towards in the future? And how are we going to get there?
Well, and also note that, we have liberalized waterfowl regulations for all other species to the extent that we can. We have some of the most liberal regulations we've ever had, but the one sore spot across the country,
They're jealous
there's a
of
lot
us.
of people that are envious of what we have here in our state, in our flyway. But the one, tough issue has been that pintail. I think the pintail, problem, part of it goes back to there were such high populations of pintails in the 1970s and the hangover effect of that. I mean, even though you will not hear regulators specifically say it, there is this urge to get back to the populations that we once had for pintail. Now, realistically, with changing farming practices in Canada and, loss of wetlands even now in the Dakotas and other parts of the prairie pothole region, we're probably never going to get back to 7 to 10 million pintail. It's just unrealistic. And so that's what we've tried to tell them is like, look, there's got to be ways that we can incrementally increase the, bag limit, but do it in a way that recognizes that we're never going to get back to what we had, 40, 50 years ago. So the strategy has been just, hey, let's go and revisit this pintail model now that we've had in place for many years.
And so talk about the pintail model. What is a pintail model?
Okay, so it's part of adaptive harvest management, and what it does is it sets the seasons and the bag limit frameworks for what we have in terms of hunting pintail. Mm-hmm. And the last modification of that took away a 3-bird option. So the most we could ever get under the current pintail model is 2 pintail.
Okay.
And right now we're getting 1. Mm-hmm. The good thing about the current model is it does reduce the possibility of closed seasons.
Oh, okay.
So that is good. So most years you're going to get 1 or 2, but you would never be able to get 3.
Yeah.
But that's still, for a California hunter, particularly a guy that's hunting the rice or some other open water, that's tough to deal with. You shoot your first 1 or 2 sprig in the morning, you're going to be then inundated with them for the rest of the day. And frankly, our populations of pintail here in California are very robust. I mean, we winter like 60% of the entire continental population. So this 1 or 2 bird limit, more than any other state, California suffers from it. Mm-hmm. So what we did is we went to the service a number of years ago and said, look, we've polled our CWA members. We've actually polled other duck hunters just generally, and they want the opportunity for more pintail in the bag and good pintail production years. And in exchange, they are willing to, risk, I guess, an increased, probability of some closed seasons when the populations are really low.
Yeah.
And can you incorporate this into the new model? So part of the way the existing model works is it treats pintail harvest as additive in terms of every bird you kill, that's 1 less, essentially 1 less than to go nest and to produce more pintail.
Okay.
That's not the way for other duck species. For other duck species, their models are much more compensatory to where they recognize that, okay, you might shoot a male mallard, but he may have died of disease or something anyway.
So they don't take that into account for pintail?
Correct. Not the way we would like to see it. So what we're hearing with the new model that's being developed.
And let's go, when's the old model ending and when's the new model beginning?
Yeah. So the old model hopefully will be done by 2025.
Okay.
And we will have a new model in place. The draft model is supposed to come out this fall.
Okay.
CWA has asked that we get some peer review, and it's not just a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and U.S. Geological Survey exercise, not just a government thing, but that private nonprofits can also provide their input. So when that is available, they have promised us there'll be a 30 to 60-day period where we can provide comment. And we have actually hired a science coordinator to help with that effort. Yes.
Okay.
And so he will be looking at the model and really, critiquing it and providing his input. So, in terms of then the model, being then fully implemented, it would be in 2025. And again, our aim is to have that 3-bird option. The good thing is what we're hearing just internally is there will be a 3-bird option.
And you're saying 3-bird option as it's a possibility, but it's not a guaranteed 3 birds. It can still be 1, it can still be 2, it can still be 0.
It would have to be for just good pintail production years that warrant
but it's an option.
It'll be an option. And that they are going to treat pintail more as the harvest as compensatory, which we've been asking for a long time. So hopefully, that's the case. That's what we're hearing, again, informally. But until the new draft model comes out, we won't.
How long has the current model been in place?
Since I think 2009.
So
right?
it's due for a redo.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
So yeah, and that's adaptive harvest management. I mean, that's the way it's supposed to be. Is that every few years you look at what you've been doing science-wise and with your models, and then tweak them again. And because if you never change things up, you'll never learn.
Yeah.
And so you gotta, do that. We think, the extra bird in the bag, it's such an incremental increase that it's not going to negatively impact their populations. We're not asking for more days, as every hunter knows. Days are much more important in determining the amount of harvest than is the bag limit. Mm-hmm. So we think just this minor tweak in the bag limit, that'll help our hunters out, make them more happy, but it won't have any adverse impact on pintail populations.
Good. Oh.
Over the years, we've been working on this, like you say, with the feds. And several years ago, we'd have a couple of their decision makers come out for a hunt so they can sit there.
I can tell where this is going.
Get their pintail at, 5 minutes after shoot time and then sit there for the rest of the day with tens of thousands of pintail around. It made an impact on them, but they have their processes and they are very conservative and extremely slow moving on these types of changes that we've been working on and lobbying them for years.
Yeah, I mean, a 14-year model seems like it needs to be updated.
Yeah. It's frustrating.
Yeah, but we've had folks come out here from D.C. who we're working on this with. They specifically come out because they want to shoot their pintail.
Oh, right? I've had people call me from all over the country for the hunt program. Hey, where can I shoot a cinnamon teal? Where could I shoot a pintail? It's like, kind of anywhere in the marsh.
I mean, key staffers, lead committee staffers, took him out in the grasslands. He's got his pintail mounted in his office, right? I mean, it's an important issue, and again, bringing people out to understand it from our perspective is what we do to create that value.
Do those outside entities that you guys are bringing in, say that person isn't even from this state, does that help us in the long run?
Oh yeah, I mean, because you're trying to bring people out and have conversations with them and educate them about why this is a priority to the organization. It's one thing to do it in a room like this, in a windowless conference room in Washington, D.C., whether that's on the Hill or just outside, because we've gone to dozens of meetings on this issue back in D.C., and you've been to flyway meetings and all over the place where we've advocated for it. Nothing compares to actually having that conversation in a blind while you're 100%. Actually hunting, and then you get to see the abundance of pintails around you and sort of get an appreciation for, okay, this is why we're talking seriously about proposing to change the policy.
Yeah, no, definitely. And the best way to get somebody out there is to have them see it firsthand. Like you said, you can only talk about it so much, show them pictures, show them slideshows, but when they get out there and see it for themselves, it's a different story.
And directly to your question, I would say the vast majority of the people that are making these decisions are not Californians, right?
Which is interesting because, as a California duck hunter, a lot of these folks that are not the most pleased about our pintail limit probably think it's coming directly from our legislator in California. And as you said, it's not. I mean, yes, it is, but at the same time, it's not. So it's something that hopefully in the next few years we'll have the option for 3, and if it's a good population, we'll get 3. Better than 1, better than 2, but hopefully we work our way there. So another thing that has been brought to the attention of a lot of local hunters, myself living in Napa, California, I have Benicia, not that far away from me. We have a lot of navigable waterways that are eligible to hunt. but there has been a pushback in the area of Benicia from non-hunters, and has come to kind of a head at a point of, are we going to continue to allow hunting? Hunting has been allowed here for a long time, or is it going to get shut down? I know, Mark, you're kind of on the forefront of this, so if you could touch on this, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, no, and you're right. There's a lot of navigable water out there, which has a lot of duck hunting taking place on it. Fortunately, the state considers that public trust waters, that as long as you have a boat, those are open to everybody and, available for recreation, which specifically includes hunting. So it's almost a right under our California Constitution, and we always want to kind of assert it that way, right? Hunting basically is a privilege if you look in other parts of state law, but hunting navigable waters is actually a right. And, we need to protect those areas, I think, above all others, because it is a right and something that is protected under our state constitution. So Benicia, unfortunately, it's just one of a long list of local communities that have tried to ban hunting on navigable waters. We've had this issue come up in Morro Bay. We've had it come up in the city of Hercules in San Francisco Bay, the city of Mountain View in San Francisco Bay. We've had it come up in Tamales Bay. And so where you have big urban areas next to hunting areas, new people move in, they hear gunshots, and all of a sudden, there's a problem. And they look for any means possible then to shut it down. Now, fortunately, in the case of Benicia, they did actually the right thing. They took it to the Fish and Game Commission. Rather than, say, adopting their own local ordinance and trying to ban it that way, they went through the appropriate process, which is the Fish and Game Commission. So we've had some very robust conversations there. At the end of the day, we want to make clear that the decision has to be based on evidence and science, not on irrational fear or prejudice against hunters, which clearly in that town there's prejudice against hunters. And so fortunately at this last commission meeting, the commission finally formally rejected the petition and agreed that there just wasn't evidence that there was a safety issue.
Good.
And obviously there's no impact on waterfowl populations or other species.
Yeah.
Now, the commission did want to look at ways to maybe reduce noise issues, because Southampton Bay, which is right next to Benicia, is a very enclosed bay. And it definitely, if you live right on the water there, you're going to hear the gunshots in the morning. So, Morro Bay has a little bit later start time. Yeah. We have had other duck clubs that maybe have gone to 20 gauge in order to kind of reduce noise, marginally. So there'll be more discussions just on the noise issue. But the good thing is, again, the petition was rejected. I can tell you this, the local residents that attended this meeting in San Jose that I was just at, they were livid. They were really angry. I think they had hoped that the commission would agree with them and actually put a ban in place. But to the commission's credit, the commission did not do that. Now, because of this, though, there may now, and they are threatening state legislation. They can also bring this before the state legislature. Okay. And if the state legislature passed a bill, that would essentially trump anything that the commission did. So hopefully that won't be the case. But if it is, Mark and I are down there, and I can tell you this, we will get a very large coalition of sportsmen's groups to oppose it.
And it wouldn't be the first time that the legislature had passed a bill banning a specific type of activity and sort of usurping the role of the Fish and Game Commission. We did that with bobcat hunting a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And, I've got really strong feelings on this. I like this tag team with Mark and I. Mark's like the play-by-play guy. I'm the color commentary guy. I mean, I just think you give them an inch, they take a mile. And whatever sort of template you come up with to fit the situation in Benicia, you'll have community after community coming forward and either asking for that or seeking to address it in their own specific way. Yeah. And the issue for me here, it's not the hunters, it's us as people, right? Like, we continue to grow, we continue to expand. I used to own a house in Natomas. Natomas used to be all rice fields. And then as the city of Sacramento grew north, and now as Roseville is growing west with all that development out on Fittyment, you're encroaching into these areas that were open ag lands and hunting areas, right? Yep. And so I move into Natomas when I first moved in there, and like Next Door shows up. You know that app on your phone.
Yeah.
And people are like, "What's all that noise? Like, what are they shooting out there?" Because right across Elkhorn are the rice fields, and people are shooting there because they have historically shot there. It's humans moving into these spaces and these environments that are creating the conflict, and then they want to go deal with it. It's like if you buy a house that gets built next to the Sacramento airport,
Right.
do you have the right to go complain about the noise and tell people you don't want planes
Right.
flying in and out of there? I liken it to something similar, and I recognize that there's got to be a balance, and I think that CWA has taken the high road and said we're willing to sit down and talk about compromises that can create things that the people in Benicia want to see and continue to provide opportunities to hunters. But that balance needs to be tempered with the fact that hunting, I think, is a right. It is a privilege. It is an opportunity that is becoming more and more limited because we as humans keep moving into these areas and destroying habitat and taking away those opportunities. We're going to have those wildland-urban interface issues. We have it for fire. We have it now for hunting and resource management issues, and there has to be a balance there.
Yeah, no, definitely. And me as, just an average hunter who likes to go out and sees this thing, it seems a little bit crazy to me because everything's happening legally. So in my eyes, it's a little outside the box. So just for my curiosity, what are some of the craziest bills, or propositions that you guys have come across, anti-hunting or others, in your time in the legislation?
Well, early in my career, there was a bill to flatly ban dove hunting, and we had to really fight that one back. And it was carried by a pretty influential Bay Area lawmaker. Luckily, we persuaded him to just drop the bill entirely. But it was sponsored by the Humane Society, and it was really a shot across the bow.
How long ago?
2003.
Okay.
That was Nation, wasn't it?
Joe Nation.
Yeah, and he was a
correct.
pretty moderate Democrat to boot on top of that, right? And so you never know where these ideas are going to come from. We've seen the bill obviously to ban the use of dogs for bear and bobcat, right?
That passed, unfortunately.
Right.
and-
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if somebody at some point will come back and just say you can't use dogs for hunting at all, right? What does that do to a
And I look
community
at
like
just
ours?
personally like how much, and I know John, same thing, my dog means to me hunting.
Yeah.
I would not even almost want to hunt
Yeah.
if I didn't have the dog out there.
Yeah, I know John with
And
his pheasant dogs.
To take that away from the houndsmen, I thought that was just the biggest travesty ever. I mean, they have as much of a right to use their dogs for hunting as any other hunter does.
Correct.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's tough, very tough, and they're the folks that are opposed to hunting. They're always looking for an angle. So we have to be vigilant at all times, and I think our stand on habitat, and we're the protectors. We're the first line protectors of habitat in the state, wetland habitat. It would be amazingly depressing how much less water, wetlands would be out there right now if it wasn't for hunters.
Yeah.
I mean, we'd have no Sassoon Marsh. I mean, that's one of the probably on a national, maybe worldwide basis. That is one of the best examples of how hunters banded together to protect that habitat. It would have been encroached on by homes and
100%.
development 30 years ago.
Yeah, and as somebody who's listening to this or a CWA member, what can they do to make any sort of influence? I know I receive CWA emails and it's like, hey, write your legislator, and we have those. Do those work?
Yes.
Do they get those?
Yes, they do. And I think that CWA does a great job at pushing the grassroots messaging and having their volunteers respond. It does make a difference at the end of the day. It is impactful. Nothing is a substitute for the one-on-one relationships that we have and our partners like Rick Ortega, the GM at the Grassland, and our ability to go in and talk directly to legislators. But they want to hear from constituents. They want to know what the people in their communities are saying. And I think it's incredibly important for our members in urban areas to understand that even better than the members in rural areas, right? Like James Gallagher will hear that a couple hundred people contacted him on the issue, but James is already there in our corner. What we need is those members who live in the Bay Area who are represented by more progressive or moderate Democrats who might not have the personal connection with hunting, or an appreciation for what we as a community do, to hear from those folks.
But
right?
they'll receive that.
They'll receive those.
Okay.
Their staff triages them and gives them counts on how many messages that they're
Interesting.
getting in. And the use of a tool like the CWA Grassroots Alert. I mean, you got to click a button and you got to put your name and your address
Pretty
in.
easy.
And that's
It's-
it.
I mean, yeah. I mean, what more do you want?
Yeah.
We can't do it for you, but it doesn't take a lot for you to do it yourself.
And it does make that voter voice. We need more people to sign up to. We
Yeah.
have a great impact, but
The more the better,
I think
definitely.
it's really, and I don't know if you guys know the numbers off your top of your head, but right now approximately 70,000 duck stamps are sold in California a year, right? Not all of those are hunters, some are stamp collectors, but it gives us a good gauge. How many letters? I mean, we do make an impact, but there's sure a lot more guys, a lot
really
more
hot-
hunters, men and women that could,
Yeah,
could
on
be
a hot
helping here.
topic issue, if we get over 1,000, we'll be lucky. And
Yeah, so that's
there's a
less than
huge-
what, 5% of our
Exactly.
membership?
So there's a massive amount of room to grow there, and we need to get those other folks involved.
But that's, I mean, that, like, to give ourselves credit, that's still pretty good, right? Like,
Actually, if you look
It's
at
a very
industry
strong-
standards,
a
it
typical
is
marketing
actually pretty
campaign,
good.
like,
Yeah.
that's
It is.
a pretty good
Yeah.
click-through rate, right?
Right.
Like, companies spend millions of dollars targeting advertisements to people and get lower success rates than that, right?
Good
so we
point.
have a really actively involved community, but I always feel like the community can do more, right? Because being a member of this community is to recognize that you are a member of a community whose sort of lifestyle and your pursuits are constantly under threat.
Yeah.
And so that is different than just being sort of a passive participant, right? I think you have to be compelled to be a more active participant in the process, going to your dinners and taking the 30 seconds it takes to click on a link
Yeah.
when we ask you to communicate with legislators. Like, trust me, like, we don't just sit here and are like, okay, something like, let's just send that out and get them to participate. It's like, no, this is the big deal. This is what we need people engaged on. And we are very meticulous about what we decide to put out and ask people to help with.
Yeah, we don't want to waste people's time or burn them out. I mean,
Exactly.
You know, if you send out too many emails, then people just roll their eyes. The other way people can really get involved, John mentioned it earlier, is, our CWA Lobby Day.
Okay.
And actually, for people that are comfortable doing that and would like to have face-to-face meetings with legislators to tell their personal story in particular as to why do they hunt? Why are they into conservation? Those kind of face-to-face meetings really make an impact on people. And so just getting as many of them involved as possible, I think, would be great. Our last lobby day, we probably had 30 participants maybe.
Right. We break into
25,
teams
30.
of like 4 to 5 folks, and these gentlemen will make appointments ahead of time with as many legislator offices as possible. So say we have 4 teams of 5 people, so that's 20 people going out, and we have a meeting every half hour. Boom, boom, for and we can do that for the whole day or for a half a day. That's a lot of offices.
Yeah.
And I've participated, I think, in every one of them over the years. We had COVID was a setback, but before that, we were doing them pretty much annually. And I've seen legislators and their staffers' eyes light up.
Really?
When we have, especially if we have teenagers in the room,
Yeah.
we've had young men and young women. My son has come, Mark's daughters have come. We've had other members who brought their daughters or sons, and they start talking about being in the marsh at sunrise, seeing the marsh come alive, seeing all the birds, all the waterfowl, but shorebirds and like wrens, and you might see a muskrat swimming around. The legislators key in on those kids, and they really, it's amazing. It really is. And then, of course, we get to talk to them about all the other things we do, and they're seeing normal people, not the paid staff. They're seeing volunteers taking the time to talk to them about it.
Yeah.
It's I think they're great. I mean, I'd like to see more lobby days, maybe even twice a year. But it's hard.
Well,
it's hard. It's logistically tough to get in front of all these legislators because they're busy people too.
It is, and our volunteers are busy with their own jobs and their
Right.
own lives, right? And to
Correct.
ask them to take a day to come down to Sacramento to participate in that is a lot to ask, but it's so tremendously valuable. Every interest group in the state of California does something like this, right? And some of them do it more often than others. I mean, look at the unions are there almost every week, it seems like, right? And now
And I
they've
wonder
got
if that's an overload, right? Because they have their T-shirts and they come in. I don't,
Right.
you know.
Right. they come in numbers, and they have programs designed around this thing. I mean, we have to accommodate our volunteers, their busy schedules, the fact that they live throughout the state. But even just getting a small increase in the number of people that wanted to participate in something like that, and it's not anything to be scared of, right? Like, we provide the talking points, we provide and set up the appointments. If it's going to be a tough meeting, one of us is usually sitting in on that conversation. We're not going to abandon you to some place where you're going to get yelled at or get a finger pointed at you. Right. You know, our job is to allow you to have a conversation with people. And what you have to recognize when you do that is, like, you're the subject matter expert in the room. That person that you're talking to has likely never been hunting before. They don't know about wetlands restoration. You're educating them and, you know, giving them valuable information. It's not that they're interrogating you or looking down at you. So people who are listening to this who think they might be interested in doing something like that, you should definitely participate.
Oh, that's great. Any you know, more people we can have come out and lobby for, you know, what they support is a great thing, whether it's sending an email or going out to one of those days. And I know through the last 40, 30 minutes that we've talked, you guys have dropped a lot of knowledge about, you know, legislation and that sort of thing. So what background did you come from? We'll start with you, Mark, and how did you end up with CWA? Like, where did you start to get into this?
Well, I fished my entire life. I didn't get into hunting, believe it or not, until I was in my 20s. But, you know, once I got hooked on that, it was an addiction for sure, to my wife's dismay. But the way I came into it, I first went and got my degree in political science and then went and got a master's in government. Mm-hmm. And then I did a stint down at the legislature working as an aide for a really conservative Republican. His name was Mickey Conroy. He was an old, crusty Marine. He was the funnest guy to work for ever. And then I went off and did a little more schooling and then got a job with the Department of Fish and Wildlife as a scientific aide, which I thought was very valuable, just learning how the department operates and its use of science and getting a greater appreciation of that was good. And then luckily I was able to get back in over at the legislature as a consultant for the Assembly Water Parks and Wildlife Committee under then Assemblyman Mike Machado. He's a farmer in Stockton. And he was from a different party. He was a moderate Democrat, but he understood the value of hunting, and he was very supportive of his rural community. So he was a good fit for me, I think. Yeah. And then luckily, after doing that for about a year and a half, I was able to land a position at CWA lobbying with Bill Gaines, and been doing that ever since. I mean, there was a time where we kind of split off our government affairs into a separate nonprofit so that we could not just represent duck hunters, but all hunters. But, you know, through all of these years, we've been representing CWA in one form or another. And it's just been the best job for me. I feel so fortunate to be able to lobby for what you truly have a passion for and believe in.
Yeah.
You can't put a price on that.
No, definitely. So how long have you been with CWA now?
23 years.
Wow.
Yep. If you count, you know, the California Outdoor Heritage Alliance percent of it. So.
All right.
It's been great.
Mark, what about your background? Where do you start up?
Yeah, I kind of come into this from a non-traditional perspective. I've got an undergraduate degree in microbiology with an emphasis in genetics.
Very nice.
Yeah. I was working for consulting companies and pharmaceutical firms across the United States and sort of got a little bored with that and ended up stumbling into a fellows program at the Capitol. Basically, they pay you a stipend to take public policy classes at Sac State, and then they kind of put you into the legislature as a glorified intern.
Yeah.
And I loved it, and I stuck with it, and kind of worked my way through the various positions in legislative office and stepped out to become a lobbyist. And here I am 20 years later owning my own lobbying firm. But in this particular community, I mean, look, I grew up in Sacramento, right? You would think that, like, with the rice and the Delta and the Sassoon right here, like, you know, everybody's got to know about ducks and duck hunting, right? Like, no, my first exposure to it was when I applied for a job at Ducks Unlimited in 2013. And they were really looking to change their public policy program. It had always been conservation people who were doing public policy. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to hire somebody who was an advocate who understood the building and the process. And could learn about the important policy things, right? So I walk in my first day of work. I'd never hunted. I didn't fish. I didn't grow up in that sort of environment. I remember going to Al Montana's and sitting in a blind with Mark Biddlecombe and Al and watching them shoot because I didn't even have a license. And so I couldn't shoot. And this was like my exposure because I got hired in like October. So right at the time that hunting season was starting, it was my initiation. So I'm an adult onset hunter, but it gives me this appreciation for the fact that like, you'd think everybody knows about it, but they don't, right?
Yeah.
And it's very easy to just like be oblivious to what's sort of happening with these communities and these resources, just even in your own backyard, right? And it's really bit me hard. I mean, I don't work exclusively on these issues anymore because I represent a variety of clients, but like my most passionate enthusiasm for lobbying revolves around the missions that were instilled in me at DU and at CWA and working with the folks in the grassland and supporting the passions of the people that I see that I interact with, right? And frankly, I enjoy doing it myself. I'm really appreciative that I stumbled into this community and now am an active participant in it.
That's awesome. And John, I know a little bit of your background is not political from the get-go, but you've been in it such a long time. So tell the folks how you kind of got in with CWA, the shortened version of where you started and how you ended up here.
Sure. I'll give you a real brief version, but I grew up back east. A lot of folks don't know this. I grew up in Chicago. I actually was in the city of Chicago, city limits through 7th grade, private school, Catholic school. But my parents and my grandparents and my uncles and my cousins all hunted and fished. So I started at a very, very early age and camping, hunting, and fishing. My first pheasants were when I was 8 years old.
Okay.
And they were planted birds, but they still counted. And first waterfowl hunts were really when I was about 14. My uncle we'd go out in the city of Chicago in these bulrush, that's what they called them back there, bulrush marshes on Lake Calumet. And teal, we'd have the early teal seasons, mallards, pheasants around there. So I grew up loving all of that. And then when I turned 20, my parents threw a major curveball, and my dad took a promotion with his company to California. I had never been west of Denver.
Wow.
So, and most of the country, believe it or not, thinks that there's a bunch of nuts and whack jobs in California. And I grew up thinking that too. I had no. I had no.
There is some truth to that.
Growing up in Chicago, we were conservative Democrats, and I had all hunted and fished, but everybody thought California was Hollywood. That's all that they thought about California. So when I got out here, my dad was in Orange County. I hated it. I went back to Chicago a few times. But then I got into junior college there in Southern California, Fullerton. They had a pre-wildlife management degree, and they got me to transfer to Humboldt State for my wildlife degree. And I was taking seasonal jobs with Fish and Game at the time and California waterfowl. I was one of the first seasonals for Cal Waterfowl in 1987. And it just built me up. I got a master's in wildlife at Iowa State. And when I got back, I became a permanent biologist with Cal Fish and Game, and I spent 21 years there. And all through that time, I was connected to CWA and hunted the public areas for pheasants and ducks all those years. And when the opportunity to become president at Cal Waterfowl opened up, I was hesitant because I had 21 years with the state and the pension there and everything, and I was the executive director of the Fish and Game Commission at the time, which is sought after position. But some friends here said you got to give it a try, and as I met with the board members here and interviewed and kind of got the offer, made the big life shift from government employee to nonprofit, and immediately I saw the benefits of the nonprofit world and how quickly we could get things done, how fast we could cut through red tape, and how much passion. I knew there was a lot of passion working at the Fish and Game and the commission, and I was in the game shop of Fish and Game for many, many years. I knew hunters, but I did not know duck hunters as well as I learned when I got here, and the passion and the how serious they take it.
Yeah.
So fast forward 13 years now, I have announced to the board and through the magazine that next year I'm going to step down and semi-retire. So that'll be a 35-year career with, wildlife and
California thanks you for everything you've done.
well,
I mean,
it's been a great ride. It's been a great ride, and I'm not going to go away. I'm going to hang in there
Good.
for part time and help.
You want to
where
work
I
in the hunt
can.
program? We need some tech
That's
positions.
hey, nothing's off the table. Nothing's off the table. So anyway,
Good. Well, kind of the last thing that I have been thinking about through in this podcast is, there's the good things that happen, there's the bad things that happen. What's the future in California? And I know we can't predict the future, but what do you guys feel the future is for California hunting? And I want you to be honest with it. Are we doom and gloom and it's a matter of time, or are we, we're going to fight the good fight and we're going to keep it going and let's see where this goes?
one thing that I could say real quick here, when I was with the Fish and Game Commission, I would go to the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agency meetings where all the Western fish and game agencies, and then there's a national group also, they get together twice a year and they talk about exactly what you just asked. And I can remember being in a group with directors from all the Western states, and they were saying, if you don't have 4% of your population as hunters, you're irrelevant and you're in big trouble. Well, California's been less than 4% for a long, long time, but I think we're extremely relevant.
Good.
And these guys can attest to it. Walking through those hallways, if we didn't have Mark and Mark here in front of those folks, our relevancy would be way low. The other thing is all these activities, and we're getting the public to realize that we're taking, we're taking a small amount of animals. We're not taking them for trophies. We're taking them for food. But the benefits of what we're doing for the habitat restoration and habitat protection for all these other species and for the public to enjoy outweighs any small amount of animals we take. And our partnerships with groups like Audubon and the Nature Conservancy helps trumpet that across the state. So I think, it's easy to say doom and gloom and to be depressed, but our waterfowl hunter numbers have been very stable since 91. The amount of stamps sold has been very stable. Of course, we're getting older. We got older guys. Got to get some more young folks in. But I would say it's not doom and gloom. When I look at these kids' camps and we're teaching children the value of hunting and they're getting their hunter education stamps and they're coming out with their eyes, boys and girls, they're like so excited and so amped up. It gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Good.
I mean, I have some of that. I definitely think that organizations like California Waterfowl have got to maintain a strong public policy presence, right? Because if you're not at the table, you're on the table.
That's a great,
Good point.
There have to be advocates for these communities down at the Capitol on a daily basis because you will get run over, right? But, I had an experience on Grizzly Island a couple years ago where you guys were offering a hunter safety education course, and somebody pulls up in like a shiny silver Model S Tesla and gets out. It's some skinny dude in like skinny jeans, and you're like, what's this guy doing here? Like clearly he'd driven all the way in from San Francisco or something like that. And he wanted to learn how to hunt ducks because people are into this like grow your own food, eat organic, source your food sort of movement. And so that, what that crystallized for me at that moment was like, you got your traditional wing of hunting, but you have people who can find their way into this environment because they maybe approach it from a different angle. It's
Correct.
It's no less relevant. It's just finding those people and communicating with those people, right? And passing along a tradition to the next generation, creating opportunities for the next folks. So I am cautiously optimistic about it, but, California is a state where the tradition of outdoor heritage is not as strong as it is, even in other blue West Coast states like Oregon and Washington, right? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done here. There's a lot of education. Take the Benicia thing we talked about earlier today. Like one of the things in their petition was people are going to get hurt from shotgun shells, and they have no appreciation for the difference between how far a bullet travels versus how much pellets coming out of a shotgun shell travel, right? And so just basic education like that. These are the things that have to be communicated. Somebody's got to be standing on the wall, not to borrow the line from, I don't know what, A Few Good Men or whatever it is that Jack Nicholson says, but there's a wall and somebody needs to defend it. And that's what CWA does with their grassroots advocacy and their professional advocacy staff. And it needs to continue.
Good.
I would just say, I mean, I do recognize we have a very difficult political environment here. I mean, the anti-gun, anti-hunting interests are very many and very well funded, and there is a lot of that sentiment in the general public too. And then we have the challenges with getting water to wetlands. Now there's huge competition for water. Again, things like Klamath, and so there's a lot of challenges. However, my piece of optimism is we have such a great story to tell the rest of the public about what we bring to the table in terms of public benefits, and chiefly it's the conservation benefits. I mean, I've heard it said before, it's the greatest story never told. We've tried to tell it, but sometimes, it hasn't been that well received or that heard the way it should be. I really think if we can communicate our messages appropriately and educate the general public about what we bring to the table, we're going to get a lot of support. There's the 10% of the public that is just adamantly against hunting, and then there's 10% that are adamantly for it, and it's that 80% in the middle. I think there's a lot of open minds there, and we have a lot of room there to focus our education efforts. And I truly believe if we do get our message out the right way, we can protect hunting in the long term, and particularly too as it relates to waterfowl hunting. I mean, there is no other type of hunting that brings that amount of conservation benefit to the state. So waterfowl hunting, if it was to ever go, it'd be the last hunting on the list. I think people are generally more accepting of waterfowl hunting than they are of other types.
Yeah, well, I mean, thank you guys for coming on. I'm sure all of the listeners of today have gained an immense amount of knowledge based on what we've talked about, as well as our membership and what they can do to, help advocate for their rights that they have. So again, thank you guys for coming on, and hopefully down the future we'll be given even more good news about where we sit as hunters in California. My name is Carlson. Thanks for watching the Save It for the Blind podcast here at the CWA Roseville headquarters. You can find this podcast at Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever podcasts are found.